Well, good morning or good afternoon or good evening, whatever time it may be that you are watching this short update and devotional. Maybe you saw the story recently of the news reporter who was working from home and filing his report, and he had I'm assuming he had an iPhone probably set up and a tripod just like I'm using right here. And uh, he assumed that they were only seeing him from here on up. So he had on a jacket and a tie. He was all dressed up from here on up. Unfortunately, if you saw the story, when they removed the banner that runs across the bottom, it revealed that he was not wearing any pants. Well, I want you to rest at ease. I am wearing pants, so you don't have to worry about that. But I have been giving a lot of thought about preaching to a camera. I don't like it. Now, don't get me wrong. I am grateful for technology. Being created in God's image means that mankind is also creative. It is part of God's common grace that allows humans to invent things. Now, some of these things, unfortunately, are used for evil because of the depravity of men's heart, but many things are used for good. So I'm thankful that we are able to, you are able to see me in the comfort of your own home while I'm here in my office. The book of Romans is sometimes called the Apostle Paul's magnus opus. Now, that's a fancy way of saying his greatest work. And I realize that all of Paul's letters that we have are inspired, so I don't want to say that one is more important than another, but certainly the book of Romans is one of the greatest religious treatises ever written. Not only did it provide the foundational gospel truth, which led to the expansion of the early church, it later sparked the Reformation. It has led to volumes and volumes of scholarly commentaries, yet it can be boiled down to the simple Romans road that even a child can understand. I've always found it interesting, though, that even in Paul's doctrinally rich letter to the Romans, he begins and ends with his desire to be there in person. In Romans chapter 1, verse 11, he writes this: "For I long to see you so that I may impart some spiritual gift to you, that you may be established. That is, that I may be encouraged together with you while among you, each of us by the other's faith, by yours in mine. I do not want you to be unaware, brethren, that often I have planned to come to you and have been prevented so far, so that I might obtain some fruit among you also, even as among the rest of the Gentiles. So, for my part, I am eager to preach the gospel to you also who are in Rome." Now, he's writing the book of Romans. He's writing this tremendously rich, theologically rich, doctrinally deep document. But as he's writing it, he's saying, I'd rather do this in person. I'd rather be here and do this in person. He ends the book of Romans the same way. In chapter 15, he writes, that I may come to you in joy by the will of God. So he realized there's just some benefit to being in person. I mean, in our current circumstances, yes, we can do it, via YouTube or whatever. But it's not the same as being in person. He said that several weeks ago. I mentioned his writing to the Thessalonians. He said the same thing. But I'm even more awestruck by the fact that he said it in the book of Romans. What in the world could he have said in person that he didn't say in the book of Romans? How could they even benefit greater than the book of Romans? But yet he begins the book of Romans and he ends the book of Romans on the same note. I wish I was there in person. Here we have the most foundational teaching on the gospel ever inspired by the Holy Spirit, and Paul still felt he needed to see them to impart sufficient edification. Well, for now we use what we have available. An iPhone on my end and your device on your end. But like Paul, we realize it is a poor substitution. Now, last night we had a very productive deacons meeting in which I laid out a 3-step grid to use in determining when we can reopen our public gatherings. Okay, a 3-step grid that we're going to use to help us determine when we can reopen. Those 3 steps are submission to governing authorities, caution for members' health and well-being, and thirdly, perception of our neighboring community. Submission to governing authorities, caution for members' health and well-being, perception of our neighboring community. Now, I'm just go back and elaborate on each of those briefly. Submission to governing authorities, of course, comes from Romans chapter 13, where we are to obey those that God has put over us. We're to submit to them as the ministers of God, and that's what we've been doing. Currently, our governor has asked Lebanon County to stay at home. So while our county is in the red zone, as they're referring to it, we will continue not to meet together. Now, we do this voluntarily. I want to stress that. We do this voluntarily in submission to authority. Okay. Now, I do also want to say that we recognize that even a higher authority than the governor is the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And we recognize that we have a First Amendment right to gather, to worship. We have freedom of worship and freedom of assembly and freedom of speech. So if there were to come a time when we feel the governor has overstepped his bounds, we would assert our First Amendment rights. But we don't believe that is happening. If there comes a time when we feel the churches are being unfairly singled out in violation of our constitutional rights, then we would start meeting together, to be honest with you. Because lastly, our ultimate authority is God and His Word. And His Word clearly tells us to not forsake assembling ourselves together. So if it comes a time when we feel that we're being asked to obey government over God, we will obey God. So the first prong, if you will, of this grid is that we are submitting to authority. Currently, it's the authority of our state government, and we will do so until we feel that they have overstepped their authority. Now, the second step here in this grid is caution for members' health and well-being. Galatians chapter 6, verse 2 tells us to bear one another's burdens. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 14 tells us to consider the weak, to be patient with all men. So we understand that various people have different viewpoints of when we should start and how we should start, and we're trying to be considerate of those varying and various viewpoints. When we do gather together again, which we anticipate will be when Lebanon County is moved into the yellow zone, we will follow the CDC recommendations. So, although I cannot give you a specific date at the moment, we do have a plan in place that includes sanitation practices, basic prevention measures, and probable changes to the seating arrangements. And again, we realize that not everybody will be comfortable returning immediately. I understand that. Maybe I mentioned this before, but when we first made this decision that we could not meet, I immediately thought, well, when we do meet again, we'll have a huge crowd. We'll have a huge attendance because people have this pent-up desire to go to church, as I hope you do. But then I realized, well, it's probably not going to be that way. Number one, when we restart, we probably won't even be allowed to have everybody filled to capacity because of social distancing. And number two, not everybody's going to be as comfortable to come immediately. So we understand that, and we're going to take that into consideration as we cautiously approach reopening. Then the third thing is the perception of our neighboring community. Now, this is a tough one. This is not as easy. Romans 13 goes on to say in verse 8 that we are to love our neighbors. We submit to authority and we love our neighbors. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 12 talks about even if they slander you, make sure it's for good deeds, and that they will see these good deeds and glorify God. So public perception is important, and we want to set the right testimony. We want to be considerate of the mood of our surrounding community. How are they feeling about getting back out and public gatherings and so on? We don't want to be perceived as putting their health at risk. Now, I admit this is a very delicate balance, and there's not a solitary mood of the community. It's somewhat subjective. When we do have a date in mind, we plan on informing the local authorities, the local police, and showing them our plan, how we're going to obey the CDC recommendations, and the most local health official that we can find, so that they know what we're doing and how we're doing it, and they're not caught by surprise. So when we feel that those three factors are lined up correctly, we will pick a date and we will have our reopening service. As I mentioned in the previous episode or two of this, it'll be an Easter service. I don't know the date, but it will be an Easter celebration. We have the service planned. We just don't yet have a date for that service. But hang in there. It's sooner than it was before. Continue to pray for our nation. Pray for those who are sick. Pray for those who have lost loved ones. Pray for Governor Wolf. Pray for President Trump. Pray for our local representatives. Pray for me. Pray for Caleb. I want to thank Charity, by the way, for playing. Caleb and I are doing our jobs, if you so to speak. But when Caleb records the song service, Charity is playing the piano for him, and I appreciate her willingness to voluntarily do that. Again, if you have a need or a prayer request, you just let me know. Call me, drop me an email, text me. Come by my house and stay in your car and shout at me while I'm on the porch, whatever it takes. I love you. God bless you. And hopefully we will be together soon.